So, she's a long-time cannabis activist and political activist. She's got a point, and she doesn't like the government's recently announced legalization task force. Matter of fact, I have some questions on the people that they actually selected for that. She feels marijuana advocates should have a voice on the federal task force. I think the composition of the task force, in my opinion, was really slanted towards one direction. But we'll talk a little bit more about Jodie. She always has something interesting to say.
Welcome to the Kash Heed Show. Today's news and views from south of the Fraser on 107.7 Pulse FM. We invite you to share your view with us. Join the conversation by phone. Call 778-574-1077. Follow us on Twitter at Pulse1077. You'll find us online at pulsefm.ca and on Facebook. Now, here's Kash Heed.
Good morning, 9:06. Well, on June 30th, the federal government announced their marijuana task force. The people that are going to lead the so-called discussion on the legalization for recreational use here in Canada. Not everyone's happy with that. Matter of fact, I have joining me in the studio today is longtime political and cannabis activist Jodie Emery. Good morning, Jodie.
Good morning, Kash.
You certainly do not like the government's recently announced legalization task force. Matter of fact, you're saying that it does not include marijuana advocates who have been voicing their opinion on marijuana, and their activism has been going on for several years. You and I have sat on several committees over probably the last 8 to 10 years. And I remember sitting with Mark on a couple things and even having a little bit of a conflict with Mark, but at times respecting one another. We were happy, Jodie, if you recall. I was at a meeting where I announced a few years ago, in 3 to 5 years, we're going to have a legalized market here in Canada for recreational use, and that's coming to fruition. We thought it was going to be done in a way that really sets us apart from everyone. But I'm kind of concerned with some of the members they announced for this task force on which direction this is going. And I know you've been an advocate for many years, and you've been very vocal on the announcement of this task force.
Well, I feel a lot of concern because the government has taken up a lot of language that we used to hear for prohibition. It's about strict regulation, limiting access, and a lot of fear-mongering, I feel, about young people and gangs, when really we know that legalization will take care of those concerns. In the meantime, we're continuing to see Canadians being arrested despite being harmless, peaceful people, and criminalized under a law that will soon be irrelevant. This government has talked a lot about legalization, but their actions show that they're maintaining the status quo.
Jodie, for quite some time, we've had de facto decriminalization in Vancouver based on our policies. And you recall I took a lot of criticism when I was a commanding officer of the drug unit, announcing we weren't going to go and criminalize people for simple possession unless there are extenuating circumstances. But you step outside of Vancouver and even into the area that this radio station mainly serves, and that's south of the Fraser, you have a completely different attitude towards it. It's shifting, but it's taken many, many years to shift. So let's just talk about that one issue of criminalizing people for simple possession right now. We know the law is going to change. We know, for example, whether it's going to be an ounce or an ounce and a half that they're found in possession for their own personal use. They could be put in front of the court system. They could have a criminal record and would not be able to travel. Yet we know if the legislation gets announced in 2017, we have a completely different type of process in place. What is the government missing on continuing to criminalize people for simple possession?
Well, I'm really confused, actually. Justin Trudeau at first was opposed to legalization, and he said decriminalization was the way to go because young people are harmed with criminal records, and even his own late brother had an encounter with police for pot. So he said we need to stop arresting Canadians. And then he advanced to support legalization, which was really people power that made that happen. It was the membership of the Liberal Party of Canada that voted to make it policy in January 2012. So Trudeau has been very reluctant to embrace the issue, and now he's saying that we won't stop arresting people, that decriminalization will just allow gangs to make money and won't change the problems that we see.
Well, they're making a lot of money now. Matter of fact,
Exactly.
and Jodie, you know, I've been involved in trying to deal with especially the South Asian male violence that we've had, and we tracked it down, and all of it's because of the prohibition of marijuana. Matter
It's
of fact,
the policy.
exactly. Their whole criminal organization is created around the exorbitant, massive amounts of money that they're making because of a prohibition of marijuana. There's a great demand for the product. Matter of fact, that's why we're failed on the prohibition, because there's such a demand and people realizing that this is not the demonized drug that the war on drugs under the Nixon era categorized. And
But what's so scary to me is that this current government, the Liberal government under Trudeau, is treating marijuana like it is some sort of deadly, dangerous threat to society. Bill Blair even said that there's significant social harms. But I want them to prove that. I want them to demonstrate the harms from cannabis, and it's actually all cannabis prohibition. If we made coffee illegal tomorrow, every cafe would be guilty of trafficking, distribution, and people would do anything to get their fix. But that's the policy that creates the problem, and if you make something illegal, you increase the risk. If you increase the risk, you increase the reward. So as you said, a lot of young people are being sucked into this underworld of gang violence and drug trafficking simply because it's so profitable. But as soon as we make it legal, that profit should disappear.
if it's done correctly.
Exactly.
And that's my fear, Jodie. When I look at this panel, let's talk about this task force. Speaking of Perry Kendall, I have so much respect for Perry. I think he is a very good choice. And let's talk about the local ones. Anne McClellan, who's actually overseeing this task force, you know, mind you, Bill Blair's there. And I've known Bill for quite some time, and I've had discussions with Bill on this particular issue. But Anne McClellan, and I was frustrated in dealing with her when she was a public safety minister, when we were trying a pilot program for the injection site in Vancouver, and the opposition I met from her bureaucrats that worked for her and from her with regard to this. So, you know, I question whether that was the best choice for this. When you go with Councillor George Chow, former councillor, and that's, you know, I don't know if that was Gregor Robertson having his say in who's going to be on that task force. When I look at his issues and his policy related to drug abuse, it's extreme right.
Mm-hmm. And we're hearing that the rest of the panel is made up of addictions experts, mental health, and former police. And I don't think they're former cops like yourself who understand.
Rav Sokar, I sat on the drug abuse committee with him, the Canadian committee, and again, trying to demonstrate the need for an injection site in Vancouver, you know, I was completely opposed by, he was part of the RCMP. He was a deputy commissioner in the RCMP at that particular time.
Right, and Anne McClellan fought against even medical marijuana
Yes.
for sick and suffering people. So how can they have a task force about legalization that features the opponents of legalization?
Let me tell you my fear, Jodie, and I'd love your comment on this, because I was involved in this company that wanted to go into Uruguay to open up. Now, Uruguay, although they'd established what the price would be to try and drive out the black market, the problem with Uruguay was, in order for you to go to a pharmacy to buy your gram of heroin, gram of marijuana for $1, you had to register with the government. Right. So I'm hoping we don't see anything like that. If you want to purchase your recreational marijuana and you're an adult here in Canada, you have to register, because that will just keep the black market in full play. Because why should you register? If something is legal and you want to consume it, why should you register with government on that?
Exactly.
That's one fear I have of this when you load the committee with the people they have.
Oh, absolutely. And we're talking about cannabis, which is far safer than alcohol. So this government goes on and on about the harms of marijuana, when really we're seeing that even Sun Life Financial said marijuana smoke is not harmful like cigarette smoke. So they've removed marijuana users from the smoker category. And a lot of the science is catching up to say cannabis doesn't have any significant long-term harms. And if this government really is looking out to protect Canadians, they should be looking at issues like pharmaceutical drugs, where doctors are handing out painkillers left, right, and center, and we're actually seeing significant social harms from those drugs.
When you look at the opiate, we have a real opioid problem here south of the Fraser. Matter of fact, when you look at the fentanyl crisis that we're dealing with right now, we have the largest percentage here south of the Fraser in the Fraser Health Authority than anywhere in British Columbia on the deaths that are caused by that. Again, it was a pharmaceutical development that never did commercialize to the extent it should have. And then W18, the same thing. And the black market now has control of that. So when you look at what the black market can do, how much money it can do, and marijuana, and this is interesting, and this is what I'm trying to convince some of the researchers to do in clinical trials, to try and move people off opiate addiction to habitually using marijuana. Could you imagine the savings to society as a result of that?
I just even shared an article from The Economist magazine saying that marijuana legalization could bring about public health benefits, savings in the healthcare system, because people use alcohol and other drugs a lot less if marijuana is available. This Liberal government, when they first started talking about legalization about 2 years ago, they went and sent missions out to Colorado and to different jurisdictions to do fact-finding, to discover what works and what doesn't. And at first the Liberals were talking about even an Amsterdam-style model where adults can go and access cannabis and use
in
it
the
somewhere.
coffee shops.
Yeah, and that's a very long-standing model that doesn't have any problems. And we see Colorado has a lot of shops, and we have a lot of opportunity for Canadians to create jobs and open up tourism and medicine and farming and research. We have so much potential if we legalize properly. But this government has done a turn of 180 degrees. They've gone away from talking about making it legal to protect Canadians from arrest, and they're talking solely about limiting it to licensed producers who seem to think they can capture and feed the entire marijuana market, which is currently being taken care of right now by an industry that exists.
185 metric tons is a consumption rate per year in Canada, based on the General Social Survey that was conducted here. You can really look at the massive amounts of money organized crime is making. Jodie, you were wanting to run for the Liberals.
Yes,
you
I
ran for
spent
the
a
Green
year.
Party provincially before. You won, and I thought, okay, you've got a position. I think Justin Trudeau capitalized on this marijuana issue to be quite frank on this, knowing that he had to get that young vote in, and people of your age and younger, they're intelligent people. They know BS when they see BS, and when you talk about the conservative position on marijuana and it's addictive and all that, and we know that's not the case with marijuana. Science has told us that for years.
Yeah, and now
How do you
the
feel?
Liberals-
How do you feel about that? Because did they use the young voters on this particular issue to get into power? And same with the assisted dying legislation here. All of a sudden they go a completely different direction on it.
Yeah, they're playing politics. And, it's very distressing for me to listen to Trudeau saying that the NDP's request to stop arresting peaceful Canadians is somehow backwards thinking, is going to enrich the gangs, when the Liberals themselves are continuing the status quo. They're allowing gangs to continue making money. They're allowing citizens to continue being arrested. What breaks my heart is the thought of these young people, so many young people who are being deprived of their opportunities, the right to travel, the ability to get a job, even the ability to volunteer can be impacted because of the marijuana laws. You don't even need to get arrested and charged, just an encounter with the cop.
I've got to tell you, we hire police officers that have smoked marijuana. I'm sure there are judges, lawyers, doctors, and
Prime ministers.
prime ministers in their college years that smoked marijuana. Just because an individual was stopped by a police officer that decided not to exercise his or her discretion, that person is criminalized, will never get to one of those positions, versus someone else that is given a break or not had to deal with it, or in a criminal fashion, goes on to be successful.
Oh, absolutely.
in
The
life.
hypocrisy and inequality there is what is so concerning, that some people can get away with it while others can't. And of course, as usual, it's mostly the poor and the young and the marginalized who are going to get these criminal records. Canadians are using pot. 40% of them admit to using it, and they'll get it any way possible. I guarantee that with this Canada Post strike coming up, a lot of mail-order marijuana is not going to be delivered, and that's why storefronts are so important.
I was talking to an executive with one of the major courier services, and he was telling me his phone, their company's phone, is just off the hook simply because there's so many people that are phoning wanting that, and it's related to exactly as you put it, Jodie, their marijuana. They want to find a different way to get it. And some entrepreneurs are now using the internet in a larger fashion than what we saw, and I think that's probably because of the crackdown on some of the dispensaries going on. Like they're finding a way to get the marijuana to the consumer through the postal service.
Cannabis could save Canada Post. How about that?
Jodie, I've got a copy of a letter that you wrote to Bill Blair with respect to this particular committee and all that. What's your next move?
Well, I'm still going to ask Bill Blair for a meeting because I went to Ottawa for the Liberal Senate Forum legalization meeting, and he introduced himself to me and said he would like to talk further. So I sent this official request to be part of the task force, given that I work in a marijuana-related industry. I've spent 12 years being an editor of a magazine, researching cannabis. My husband has been arrested, so I've been through the criminal justice system. I've spoken in Washington state legislature. I mean, I've done a lot to help make marijuana legalization possible. And I feel that someone like me should be able to have a voice on the panel since we really sacrifice and dedicate our lives to make legalization a reality. But unfortunately, Bill Blair said he was not going to let me be on the task force, even though Jane Philpott, the health minister, said she wouldn't rule it out. But at least I can continue to get the message out there the way I always have, through protesting, speaking to the media with opportunities like this, and just reminding everyone that we're going to legalize marijuana not just so a couple companies can make money on the stock market. We should be legalizing marijuana because it's an injustice to criminalize peaceful Canadians for an activity that is not harming anyone and for something that will be legal in the future. We're really creating a second-class citizen group by saying some people will be criminals into the future. The Liberals have erased the idea of amnesty, and yet others will be allowed to do all of that marijuana stuff legally. It's just unjust and unfair and unequal.
You know, absolutely. Now, when we talk about amnesty, they're not even looking at that right now. So you may have, I'm not sure what the estimate, I was talking to actually David Herford, who wrote the Young Liberals policy that was adopted into the platform for the Liberal guy. And, you know, David and I are very good friends. And we talked about the large number of people that have been criminalized by marijuana. It's in the thousands, multi-thousands, you know, if not the 100, if they're still alive.
Since the 60s,
if they're still alive, we're talking about that number. You would almost have to have some type of policy or part of legislation in place. So the minute we actually put this legalization regime in, whatever that's going to look like, into place, that there may be some default of amnesty with all of these individuals versus them having to go through the amnesty process.
Absolutely. And the Liberals will be doing a great disservice to our citizens if they allow a vast majority of marijuana users to remain criminals. You know, they try and paint the marijuana industry as full of just like cartel members that were all dangerous and violent. But really, a lot of decent Canadians are just trying to get by being in this industry. And when the government says, well, we don't know where the marijuana comes from when it's in these dispensaries, we don't know who grows it. Well, clearly, if you threaten them with arrest, they're going to stay in the closet. But if they were allowed to come out and say, yes, this is my product, this is my produce, I'm proud of it, they would gladly do so.
Well, we go back to Mark and I, when I was in charge of drugs, our little conversation. But, you know, and there was only one dispensary, you know, that I allowed to open. And that was the
BC Compassion Club Society.
On Commercial Drive. Okay. And through our surveillance, we saw they were actually selling to sick people. They weren't selling to kids or, you know, people that really wanted it for a recreational purpose. We actually tracked back the providers of the Compassion Club to ensure they were not connected to, you know, the illicit organized crime, these type of illicit crime groups that are out there operating. So we knew, you know, like I call them hippie farmers. You know.
Well, and that's a great
that's
number
my generation,
of them.
but
it's true. You're absolutely right. It's not all bad, dangerous people. It's a lot of Canadians who just want to contribute and that they realize there's profit in this plant and they care about it. It's no different than farmers who love their crop or anybody who's in a business, the craft beer people or even the fancy coffee shops that are everywhere. I mean, the juice, bottled juice. Do we have enough fresh pressed juice already? Mm-hmm. But there are people who are passionate, and the only reason they have to hide is because the law forces them to. So here you've got the Liberals talking about legalization, but it's the law that creates the problems that the Liberals are maintaining. And while they work out the details of legalization, and I encourage listeners to talk to them, they're opening up for a discussion paper. They want Canadian input. Go and check that out and share.
But have
that
they already
info.
made up their minds?
I think they have.
We've seen this play out before,
Yes.
where the bureaucrats have already written the piece of legislation. Now they're going to fit in all their consultation into that piece of legislation. I have to ask you, Jodie, home growing. They need to address, the recent, strike down of the MMPR versus the MMAR dispute. They need to address that. John Conroy, he laid it out in his the reasons why they had to set that aside. Home growing has to be part of this new legislation. We see it in Colorado. We see it in Uruguay, up to 5 plants, or 6 plants, maybe only half in flowering at any given time. What's your opinion on home growing?
Oh, Canadians should be allowed to grow their own. Colorado does allow for that, and it can be done very safely. We have far more house fires and dangers from kitchens than we've seen from marijuana. And any grow-ups that are dangerous are just being done recklessly by people who don't care. So it's the same as anything else. Just make sure you do it responsibly and that you don't cause any harm, and everything is great.
How many plants do you think we should set the limit at?
Well, tobacco, you can grow a lot of your own tobacco, and as long as you're not trying to sell it to others, then you can just do as you please. And we allow home brewing of alcohol too, so I figure we should allow at least 6. I think even more is fine, but if you want to sell it, that's different.
But, again, I'm not a person of drinking someone's homemade wine or homemade beer. I like the convenience of going to the liquor store and buying the product I want of beer or whatever. When you look at this, and this was some of the propaganda that came from some of the licensed producers was that, this homegrown, this and that, we have to, limit that, it's all that. But really, people are going to go to where it's convenient.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it would be nice to grow a couple of plants just to see how it works, but, really, when it comes down to it, it'd be nice to have a lot of options in stores.
Well, I think there's a lot more to say about this going forward. Look forward to having you back on the show. Thanks for driving all the way out here to Surrey. It's not that bad of a drive when you're going against the traffic.
Beautiful, beautiful place, and it's great to see you after all these years.
Great, Jodie. You take care. Keep up your advocacy for trying to do this responsibly here in Canada.
Will do.
Coming up next on Pulse FM, we are going to talk to Catherine Mateo. She's the president of the Vancouver Dyke March and Festival Society. We're going to talk about the federal government considering gender-neutral ID. Ontario's already moving in that direction, but I want to thank Jodie Emery. She's a longtime political and cannabis activist, and she feels that marijuana advocates should be part of the federal task force. Would love your feedback. You can email us at the Kash Heed Show at pulsefm.ca or on our phone line 778-574-1078. Coming up next on Pulse FM, Catherine Mateo.
Stay with us for more of today's news and views on the Kash Heed Show on 107.7 Pulse FM.